Chala, thank you. Now, China has joined a number of countries in temporarily grounding the type of Boeing aircraft involved in the Ethiopia crash. Meanwhile, Boeing has said it's not issuing any new guidance despite its second deadly disaster. Well, with more details and more analysis, we turn now to the aviation journalist Seth Kaplan, who joins me in the studio. I want to make this very clear for our viewers. This is very unusual for a brand new commercial aircraft type to basically fall out of the sky on takeoff twice in a couple of months, right? It's unusual.
Highly unusual. Teething issues of the non-fatal sort are very common. Almost every new aircraft family has various issues come up, some worse than others. But to have something like this happen with a brand new aircraft, indeed, without much precedent.
That said, takeoff is the most dangerous time of any flight, isn't it?
It is. Any pilot will tell you that. A lot going on, and indeed, once you're up at cruise altitude, I mean, nowadays pilots are, if anything, struggling to avoid boredom. Takeoff always an issue. Although, of course, usually pilots manage to overcome those issues, as they did not rather clearly in this case.
No. Now, the hope for this aircraft was extraordinary, wasn't it? I've been seeing things in the newspapers about the 737 MAX 8 for many years. It was supposed to be a real savior for Boeing, and now it looks like they have a real problem on their hands.
Yeah, and that's why airlines ordered 5,000 of these so far. I mean, including just in recent weeks when President Trump was visiting Vietnam with that high-profile summit with North Korea. Another 100 of these ordered by one of the Vietnamese carriers. So yeah, been taking orders by the hundreds. An innovative aircraft in many regards. And in this case, as we think back to another crash we were talking about just before the broadcast, the Lion Air crash just several months ago, one of those innovations seems to have perhaps been a part of causing the crash.
Well, let's look at that in more detail, because this is the same aircraft, and we don't know what happened with the Ethiopian Airlines flight yet, but it looks to have been very, very similar. In the case of Lion Air in Indonesia, the pilots were struggling to control the aircraft, weren't they? What happened?
Yeah, so it's an anti-stall system that's been put in place, somewhat ironically, to prevent crashes that now seems to have played a role in it. There were high-profile crashes in the past. I think some viewers will recall Air France Flight 447, which crashed off the coast of Brazil. In that case, you had an airplane that seemed at least to perhaps be stalling, and pilots doing what maybe those of us who aren't pilots would instinctively do, which was to try to climb, pull back on the stick. What you're supposed to, in fact, do is, if you're a pilot, is dive into the stall and regain airspeed, and then that, in fact, will lift you back up. A Colgan Air crash flying for Continental back that same year, same thing. Some viewers, at least in the U.S., would remember. So people said, well, can't there be technology to help prevent this? That's what that system was supposed to do. Instead, at least partly played a role in the Lion Air crash.
Right. And so, although it's early days, people must be looking in that direction, surely, and yet Boeing has said it won't issue any further guidance.
Right, at least broadly speaking, similarities in terms of planes with erratic vertical climbs, and that's what rather clearly, we don't know everything yet, but we know that this plane was climbing, as you said, erratically, which was the case as well with Lion Air.
Why do you think the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, which really takes the lead for these issues in the world, still is allowing these planes to fly within the United States? And in fact, China and Indonesia have taken the lead and suspended theirs.
They have, and Ethiopian Airlines itself, in its case, not ordered by its country, perhaps unsurprisingly, did the same thing. Yeah, I mean, the FAA is I'm sure, looking at this sort of in a very technical way, and we can only guess by their actions that so far they haven't established a systemic enough problem to ground the fleet. But there's precedent for them grounding new aircraft types. The Dreamliner, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner back in 2013, a series of problems that didn't even kill anybody in that case. So you'd hope that, yeah, if they established that they would take swift action.
So, Seth, finally, and fairly briefly, if you will, and I understand that people have died in this crash, and it's a very bad situation for their families, but just looking at the Boeing company, major aviation company, this is not going to be good for them. Their share price was down 12% earlier today.
Right, and that tells you that investors are concerned that airlines and passengers won't forgive them as quickly this time as they did after the Lion Air crash. That one, people were sort of willing to set it aside, say, well, airline with perhaps a spotty safety record, perhaps some pilot error, perhaps airline error in putting a plane back into service that had problems the day before. Here, with the second, without those kinds of questions yet, yeah, Boeing share price reflects it.
Seth Kaplan, aviation journalist, thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.